when a homeless man approached Baron Trump and asked, "Can you give me $1?" His response left everyone speechless. Instead of simply pulling out $1, Baron paused, looked the man in the eye, and said something no one expected. What followed was not just an exchange of words but a moment that revealed his perspective on kindness, privilege, and responsibility. The interaction went viral, sparking debates and leaving people questioning the power of one small gesture. It was a gray afternoon in New York, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. On the corner of Times Square, a homeless man named Harold sat with a worn sign that read, "I just need $1 to eat today." His face was weathered from years on the streets, but his eyes still reflected a faint glimmer of hope. The crowds passed by in a steady stream, most ignoring him or averting their eyes. That day, Harold felt especially down. He hadn't found a stable shelter in weeks, and his stomach growled with hunger. Although he didn't expect much from the people passing by, he still hoped that at least one person would stop and offer some help. Among the crowd, a tall young man with blonde hair and a calm gaze walked by, accompanied by 2 men in dark suits. Harold noticed something different about the young man. His demeanor was polished, but there was a quiet serenity about him. Without much thought, Harold called out as the man passed by. "Hey, man, could you spare $1?" Harold shouted, not really expecting an answer. To his surprise, the young man stopped suddenly, surprising both his security guards. Turning toward Harold, the young man gave him a curious look, followed by a friendly smile. Ignoring the protests of the security men, the young man walked over. "What's your name?" the young man asked, his voice calm and polite. Harold, somewhat confused by the attention, replied, "Nice to meet you, Harold." "I'm Baron," said the young man, extending his hand for a shake. Harold hesitated for a moment but eventually accepted. The warmth of Baron's handshake surprised him. It wasn't every day that someone treated him with such courtesy, especially someone who seemed to come from a world so different from his own. "Why do you need $1?" Baron asked, leaning in slightly to hear better. Harold let out a bitter laugh. "Why do you think? To eat. I haven't had a decent bite in days." Baron nodded, seemingly processing the information seriously. One of the security guards beside him leaned in to whisper something in his ear, likely advising him to move on, but the young man raised his hand, signaling for the guard to wait. "What if I don't just give you $1, but I also invite you to lunch?" Baron proposed, surprising both Harold and his companions. Harold blinked, taken aback. It wasn't uncommon for people to give him a few coins or small bills, but an invitation to lunch was something completely unexpected. "Are you joking?" Harold asked, still skeptical. "Not at all," Baron replied. "I know a good place nearby. Come on, my offer still stands." He smiled warmly. Before Harold could respond, Baron had already signaled to his security guards to follow. Though still unsure, Harold decided to accept. What did he have to lose? As they walked, Harold couldn't help but wonder about this young man. Who was he to offer a meal to someone like him? They entered a small Italian restaurant that looked straight out of a postcard. The tables were covered with crisp white cloths, and the aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air. Harold felt out of place, but Baron reassured him with a glance. "Order whatever you want," Baron said, pointing to the menu. Harold scanned the menu, though many of the dishes had unfamiliar names. Finally, he opted for something simple: spaghetti with meatballs. Baron, on the other hand, ordered a salad and lemonade. As they waited for their food, Harold couldn't contain his curiosity. "Who are you really, man? Not every day does someone like you stop to talk to someone like me." Baron looked at him with a mixture of humility and seriousness. "I'm just a young man trying to do the right thing. My father always told me that if you have the chance to help someone, you should. I believe everyone deserves a chance." When the food arrived, Harold devoured his plate eagerly, while Baron ate calmly, enjoying their conversation. During the meal, Harold shared pieces of his life, how he lost his job, his home, and ultimately his self-confidence. Despite everything, there was still a small part of him holding on to the hope that things could improve. Baron listened intently, never interrupting or judging. When Harold finished speaking, the young man remained quiet for a few moments before responding. "Harold, I think you have more strength than you realize. We all face challenges, but the key is not to give up. What would you say if we worked together to change your situation?" Harold looked at him, incredulous. "Work together? What do you mean?" "I have some resources that could help you, but first I need to know if you're willing to put in the effort to move forward. It won't be easy, but if you're willing to try, I'll support you." Baron's words left Harold speechless. No one had ever offered him something like this before, and the sincerity in the young man's eyes was undeniable. Though Harold was still doubtful, he sensed that this encounter could mark the beginning of something new. That night, as Harold returned to his usual spot to sleep, he couldn't stop thinking about the conversation he'd had. For the first time in a long time, he felt like there might be a way out for him, an opportunity to rebuild his life. Meanwhile, Baron also reflected on their encounter. He knew helping Harold wouldn't be easy, but something about the homeless man had moved him deeply. He was sure that his decision to offer help would have an impact that would change both of their lives forever. That night, Harold couldn't sleep as he lay in his usual spot in an alley, staring at the night sky. Baron's words echoed in his mind. "If you're willing to try, I'll support you." The idea of receiving help was bittersweet. For years, Harold had learned to distrust promises, especially from people outside his world. However, something in the young man's gaze had inspired a sense of trust. Harold knew he couldn't let this opportunity slip away. The next day, just as the sun was rising, Harold returned to the spot where he had met Baron. Though he wasn't sure if he would find him again, he decided to try. Time passed slowly, and when the sun was already high, a black van pulled up in front of him. The tinted windows rolled down, and to his surprise, there was Baron, his usual calm demeanor in place. "I knew you'd come back," Baron said with a smile. Harold approached cautiously, still incredulous that someone like Baron was so committed to helping him. "Are you really serious about this?" Harold asked, his voice filled with both hope and skepticism. "Totally serious," Baron replied, stepping out of the vehicle. "Today, we'll start with something simple. How about I take you to a place where you can shower, have a warm meal, and rest?" Harold nodded slowly, still unsure but willing to take the first step. Baron took him to a community center that partnered with local organizations to support homeless people. There, Harold was able to shower for the first time in weeks, receive clean clothes, and enjoy a hearty meal. Meanwhile, Baron stayed by his side, making sure everything went smoothly. Here's the rewritten version. "How do you feel?" Baron asked. After finishing his meal, Harold responded, "I haven't felt this human in years," his words filled with a mix of gratitude and vulnerability. Baron nodded knowingly, as if he understood exactly what Harold meant. What Harold really wanted to say was, "This is just the beginning." "Now, we need to work on a plan," Baron said. "Think about what you'd like to do with your life. What skills do you have? What kind of work could you do?" Harold paused, lost in thought. It had been so long since he'd asked himself those questions that he could barely remember the answers. "I used to work in construction," he said after a moment. "I was good with my hands, but after an accident I lost my job, and everything just spiraled from there." Baron listened intently, then nodded. "Maybe we can start there. I know a few people who can help you find work in that field, but first, we need to make sure you're ready." That afternoon, Baron took Harold to a social services office where they helped him obtain temporary identification and began the process of recovering his official documents. It was a long and painstaking task, but Baron stayed by his side, never letting him feel alone. "Why are you doing this for me?" Harold asked as they left the office. Baron stopped and looked him in the eyes. "Because I can, and because I believe everyone deserves a second chance." Baron's simple yet sincere words touched Harold deeply, stirring something inside him. Despite still harboring doubts about his ability to truly change, Harold began to feel a spark of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. That night, Harold was transferred to a temporary shelter Baron had arranged for him. It wasn't much, but it had a clean bed and a roof over his head, luxuries he hadn't had in a long time. Before leaving, Baron handed him a small notebook and a pen. "I want you to write down what you'd like to achieve over the next few months. Don't worry if the goals seem impossible. The important part is that you start imagining a future beyond this." Harold glanced at the notebook, a little puzzled, but accepted it with a slight nod. "I'll see you tomorrow," Baron said as he left, leaving Harold alone with his thoughts. That night, in the quiet of the shelter, Harold opened the notebook and scribbled a few words. "Regain my dignity." His handwriting was clumsy and the phrase was brief, but to him it marked a commitment. For the first time in years, he felt like there might be a way forward. Meanwhile, Baron returned to his home, reflecting on the day. Helping Harold would be a long and difficult journey, but Baron was determined to stay the course. There was something about Harold, something that, though buried by years of hardship, was still there, waiting to be rekindled. Both men were about to embark on a journey that would change their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The days started to settle into a new routine for Harold. Every morning, he woke up at the shelter, where he was given a hot breakfast. Then, Baron would pick him up, always on time in the same black van. His days varied. Sometimes it was a government office to complete paperwork. Other times it was a workshop where Harold started reacquainting himself with tools and construction techniques. But not everything was easy. Harold had been away from the discipline and structure of work for years. There were moments when he felt overwhelmed, and his past failures loomed over him. "What if I'm not good enough?" he asked one day while adjusting a piece of wood in the workshop. Baron, who had been quietly watching from a nearby bench, put down his tablet and looked at him with calm assurance. "Fear of failure is normal, Harold, but you can't let it hold you back. If you fall, we'll get back up together. No one expects you to be perfect. They just expect you to keep trying." Those words hit Harold harder than he expected. Slowly, his doubts started to dissipate, replaced by a growing determination. Little by little, his hands regained their former skill, and with it, his confidence. One of the most pivotal moments came when Baron took him to meet a local contractor, a family friend, to discuss the possibility of a temporary job for Harold. "This is the man I told you about," Baron said, smiling as he introduced Harold. "He's experienced in construction and ready to get back to work." The contractor, a burly man with a thick mustache, gave Harold a measured look. "How long has it been since you worked in construction?" he asked bluntly. "Years," Harold answered honestly, "but I'm willing to learn quickly and give it my best." The sincerity in Harold's words seemed to soften the contractor's tough exterior, who finally nodded in agreement. "All right, I'll give you a trial period. I can't promise anything long-term, but if you prove you can handle it, we'll discuss something more stable." Harold accepted with a sense of gratitude, knowing that this opportunity was more than he had expected. As they left the office, Baron gave him a congratulatory pat on the back. "I knew you could do it. This is just the beginning." As Harold continued adapting to his new life, Baron noticed something that made him pause. Harold rarely spoke about his family, and when he did, there was an unmistakable mix of pain and nostalgia in his voice. One afternoon, while they shared a simple lunch in the park, Baron decided to address it. "Harold, have you ever thought about reconnecting with your family?" Harold, who was halfway through a sandwich, stopped and looked at Baron, his face serious. "My family." He paused, as though weighing his words carefully. "I don't know if they'd want to see me. I failed them. I lost everything, and I distanced myself so I wouldn't be a burden." Baron listened intently, nodding slowly, but not pushing him. "We all make mistakes, Harold, but sometimes the people who love us are more willing to forgive than we think. Maybe you should try." Harold didn't respond immediately, but Baron's words stayed with him. That night, after hours of thought, Harold took the small notebook Baron had given him and wrote one name: Mari. She was his daughter, whom he hadn't seen in nearly 10 years. The next day, as Harold worked on a project in the workshop, he approached Baron. "There's someone I'd like to try to see again. My daughter, Mari. I don't know where she is, but I'd like to try." Baron smiled, pleased to see Harold ready to face that chapter of his life. "We'll figure it out. Leave it to me." Using his resources and connections, Baron began the search for Mari. It wasn't an easy task. Time had passed, and Harold knew very little about where she might be. After several days of searching, Baron finally received a call with good news. "We found her," he said to Harold one morning, showing him a piece of paper with an address. "She lives in a nearby suburb and seems to have her own family." Harold stared at the paper, feeling a rush of emotions, excitement, fear, and uncertainty all at once. "What if she doesn't want to see me?" he asked quietly. "You won't know until you try," Baron said firmly. The next day, they drove to the suburb where Mari lived. When they arrived, Harold's heart was racing. The house was modest but well-maintained, with a small garden in front. Baron gave him an encouraging smile. "I'll be right here, but this is something you have to do on your own." Harold nodded, took a deep breath, and approached the door. His hands trembled as he rang the doorbell. The seconds that followed felt like an eternity. When the door finally opened, a young woman appeared, her expression one of disbelief. "Dad?" Mari's voice shook as she spoke. Harold could barely hold back the tears. "Yes, daughter, it's me." Mari stood there for a moment, looking at him in surprise before stepping forward and hugging him tightly. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as they embraced. Baron watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. He had helped Harold take an important step, and he couldn't be more satisfied. That moment marked a turning point in Harold's life. Reconnecting with Mari gave him a reason to move forward with renewed purpose. It also confirmed that, despite everything, he could rebuild his life and heal the wounds of the past. As Harold and Mari talked, Baron returned to the car with a smile, knowing that his work wasn't finished. There was still more to do, more bridges to rebuild, and more lives to impact. The emotional reunion with his daughter changed Harold profoundly. Since that day, he felt more motivated than ever. Mari, though initially surprised by his sudden appearance, began inviting him over regularly, allowing him to meet his grandchildren, 2 young children who looked at him with curiosity and admiration. During their time together, Mari shared the years of pain and confusion she had experienced, speaking about her struggles and the emptiness of not knowing what had happened to her father. But she also spoke of how she had learned to be strong in his absence. Harold listened intently, deeply remorseful for his distance, and promised that he would never fail them again. "Dad, you don't need to prove anything to me," Mari said, her voice filled with warmth. "The fact that you're here now means the world to me." As Harold's relationship with his daughter blossomed, Baron continued to guide him forward. The temporary work with the contractor had gone well, and soon Harold was offered a more stable position. It was an important milestone, one that Harold accepted with deep gratitude and determination. One day, while Harold was working on a construction project, Baron arrived unexpectedly. He was dressed in his usual immaculate suit, but today there was an unmistakable enthusiasm in his expression. "What brings you here, buddy?" Harold asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I have something important to talk to you about," Baron replied, handing him an envelope. Harold opened it cautiously and found a set of plans for what seemed to be a modern shelter. The plans included large common areas, comfortable rooms, and spaces for educational workshops. "What is this?" Harold asked, his curiosity piqued. "It's a project I've been working on," Baron said with pride. "I want to build a shelter for homeless people, not just a place for them to sleep, but a place where they can get support, learn, and start over, just like you did." Harold was speechless. The project was ambitious, but the purpose was clear and noble. "And what does this have to do with me?" Harold asked, finally breaking his silence. "I want you to be part of the team that builds it," Baron said, a smile tugging at his lips. "Your experience, your perspective, it's invaluable. No one knows better than you what these people need." Tears welled up in Harold's eyes. The idea of giving back to the community, of helping others in the same way he had been helped, felt incredible. "Baron, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Baron replied with a grin. Harold nodded, overwhelmed by the opportunity, and accepted with gratitude and excitement. The process of building the shelter became a transformative experience for Harold. He was involved in every aspect of the project, not only in the physical construction but also in designing educational programs and workshops. Baron ensured Harold was part of every key decision, valuing his insights and experiences. During this time, Harold began participating in community events organized by Baron and his team, where he shared his story, inspiring others who were struggling not to give up. In each talk, he spoke about how a simple act of kindness, a conversation with a young person who was willing to listen, had changed his life. "What Baron did for me wasn't just give me an opportunity. He showed me that there was still hope, that I could still be someone," Harold often said, and his words resonated deeply with others. Slowly but surely, the shelter project began to gain support from organizations and donors. One day, as Harold and Baron reviewed the shelter's progress, an older man approached them hesitantly. His clothes were worn, and his eyes reflected the hardships of life. Harold recognized him immediately. It was Raymond, an old friend from the time he had spent on the streets. "Raym, is that really you?" Harold asked, walking toward him with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Raymond nodded, clearly moved. "I heard you speak at one of the events a few weeks ago. I couldn't believe it. It's so good to see you again." The two men hugged, recalling the tough times they had shared. Raymond explained how, inspired by Harold's story, he had decided to seek help and was now in rehabilitation. "If you could make it out," Raymond said. "I'm here for you, Raymond," Harold replied, moved by his friend's progress. "You can do it." Months passed, and the shelter was finally completed. It was a modern, welcoming building, a beacon of hope for those who had lost their way. The opening ceremony was an emotional event, featuring speeches from Harold, Baron, and other key contributors. Harold, dressed simply but elegantly, stood before the crowd with a microphone in hand. "This place isn't just a roof over people's heads," Harold said. "It's a second chance, a reminder that no matter where you're at in life, it's never too late to start over. I've been where many of you are now, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that change is possible." The audience erupted in applause, and Harold felt more pride than he ever had before. Baron, standing by his side, gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "You did it," Baron said. "I couldn't have done it without you," Harold replied, glancing at the shelter that now stood as a testament to their hard work. He knew that his life had taken a complete turn. What began as a simple encounter on the streets had set off a chain of events that had not only changed his life, but also the lives of many others. Now, Harold had a purpose, a supportive family, and the conviction that with kindness and perseverance, anything was possible. With the shelter up and running, Harold became an integral part of its daily operations. Every day, he met people who arrived with heartbreaking stories, but also with a spark of hope. These were people he recognized in himself. He offered not just words of encouragement, but also practical tools, skills, workshops, employment programs, and emotional support networks. The shelter soon gained recognition as a model for helping homeless people. News outlets began highlighting its holistic approach, focusing not only on providing a roof, but also on giving people the tools they needed to rebuild their lives. Although Harold was initially uncomfortable with the media attention, he agreed to participate in interviews to promote the cause. Baron continued to play an active role in the project. Despite his duties in the business world, he always found time to support the shelter and brainstorm new ways to expand the initiative. Together, they dreamed of opening more shelters in different cities. One fateful day, Harold received an unexpected invitation. Baron asked him to join him at a high-profile fundraising event in New York, where influential business people, politicians, and philanthropists would gather. "I don't belong in those circles," Harold said hesitantly. "You're the perfect person to be there," Baron insisted. "Your story is the heart of this project. I want the world to hear it." Despite his nervousness, Harold agreed. Baron provided him with a sharp suit and prepared him for the event, assuring him that everything would go smoothly. On the night of the event, Harold found himself surrounded by powerful people, many of whom regarded him with curiosity. When it was his turn to speak, Harold took the stage, his heart racing. 2 years ago, I was on the street, directionless and without hope, Harold began, looking out at the crowd. Today, I'm here not because my life changed overnight, but because someone believed in me and gave me a chance. His words resonated with the audience, and when he finished, they gave him a standing ovation. Baron, standing across the room, beamed with pride. After the event, the shelter project gained incredible momentum. Several organizations offered financial support, and others expressed interest in replicating the shelter model in their own communities. Harold became the spokesperson for the movement, traveling to other cities to share his experience and collaborate on new initiatives. Despite his newfound fame, Harold remained grounded. He never lost sight of his roots and continued to work directly with the shelter's residents, always reminding himself that they were the reason for everything. One day, as Harold walked through the shelter, he paused in front of a mural painted by the residents. It depicted a large tree with deep roots, each branch representing a story of overcoming adversity. Harold gently touched the painting, reflecting on his journey. Baron soon joined him, his signature calm smile in place. "What are you thinking?" Baron asked, leaning beside him. "I never imagined this," Harold replied. "If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be here, I would have thought they were crazy." Baron nodded, admiring the mural. "Life has a way of surprising us. But none of this would have been possible without your courage." Harold looked at him with gratitude. "And without your belief in me, Baron, I'll never forget it." The shelter project became a symbol of hope and transformation. Thanks to the collective efforts of Harold, Baron, and a dedicated team, the lives of hundreds of people were changed. Harold had not only found a new life, but also a purpose much greater than himself. In the end, what began as a simple request, "Can you give me $1?" set in motion a series of events that affected thousands of people. Harold, the man who had once lost everything, became a living example of change, even in the most difficult circumstances. Baron, the young man who chose compassion and generosity, showed that a single act of kindness could trigger monumental change and leave a lasting impact on the world. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring tale.